Welcome back to Great Northern Cascade Division in N-Scale. My name's Ian. In this video, I'm going to take a little bit of a diversion from playing with signaling. I'm still wrapping my head around some stuff and trying not to lose my patience in soldering tiny little 603 SMD LEDs onto magnet wire. And I'm going to explore an MP3 soundboard that can play station announcements for me. So you can use these MP3 soundboards for a whole bunch of different things. You could have it doing some kind of scenic background noise around a city. You could do it country sounds as you'll be going through fields, hills, that kind of stuff. You can have it triggered manually by a push button, toggle switch, something like that. You could also put reed switches on the layout and then have something that will be on your rolling stock so as it goes through and triggers it. Or you could also maybe do an IR sensor, something like that. There's a whole bunch of different options and possibilities for these things. And this was something that I wanted to play with on my previous layout when I was doing a 00 gauge British layout for Newcastle Central Station, northeast of England, where there was going to be a ton of passenger traffic coming in and out. I think there were 12 different platforms. And so it was really cool to do operating sessions and stuff, but I kind of felt like it needed to have a bunch of station announcements going on. Never quite got around to it. But one of the British modelers that I follow, Gary over at Cheeky Tech, who had recently done a video about a couple of months or so ago where he went into this exact thing, MP3 soundboards, and just like, okay, well, now that I know all the different intricacies of it, and I've let someone else go and figure out how to make this stuff work, I thought, okay, that looks like the solution for me. So I'm actually going to do it on the little Japanese layout that I have. It's still on the N-scale layout. It's all Kato stuff, but I'm going to try it over there rather than jumping straight into doing on Great Northern and Cascade Division, because I want to kind of figure out some of the wiring. I want to figure out how you get the sound files on there. I want to figure out what are the different push button options and programming options for it and stuff like that. So the trends that you see are going to be a little bit different. The audio is going to be a little bit different. Hopefully it's interesting. I barely understand half of it, and I'm going to try and avoid translating stuff because I know I'm going to make a mess of it. But again, it's just to do some kind of station announcements and get a feel for what this thing can do. All told, I think the board's about $10 US. I did a bunch of pre-wired push buttons because I'm lazy. They were about $6 or $7 US. And then I got a couple of little 3-watt 4-ohm speakers. I think they were 2.5-inch speakers. I got the power of them for about $6 or $7. So all in, this is about a $25 solution. I think it really adds a whole lot of character to the layout, the Japanese layout, and I'm really excited to then move over and get this done in the Seattle stations for King Street and Union Station. So let's have a look at what these MP3 soundboards can do. Hope you find it interesting. Let me know if you've got some ideas as to where you might use it on your layout. I'm also really interested if there's an easy way to expand beyond doing 8 sounds. I feel like if you connect it into something like an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi, you could do more. For now, on the Japanese layout, it's fine, but once I come to doing King Street and Union Station, I am kind of curious as to can I have more sounds playing on this. They're all just MP3 files you do on your computer. But yeah, let's take a look at this one, get some ideas for doing it on the main Great Northern layout itself, and hopefully enjoy it. Take care.
まもなく2番線に上の池袋方面行きが参ります。危ないですから黄色い線までお下がりください。秋葉原ご乗車ありがとうございます。2番線ドアが閉まります。ご注意ください。
So this is the little MP3 board that I have gone with. I got this one specifically because it can go from 6 volts through to 35 volts, which is perfect because over on the Japanese layout, that means I can pull off a 12-volt accessory from one of the Kato power packs, and on my main Great Northern Cascade layout here, I've got that 12-volt DC accessory bus running around. So I don't need any separate power for this. I can run it at 12 volts and it'll be fine. So a little bit weird on the back. It has it much more labeled out. I'm not sure how well it's going to focus in on the GoPro, but basically on the right-hand side, we have up to 8 different inputs that we can have. And on the top left here is where we have a speaker connection. And on the top right here is where we have our power connection. You can also plug in with a little 3.5mm adapter if you wanted to for a speaker. What I went with, and bring those out, was this little 3-watt 4-ohm speaker. Speaker. What is it? Let's put it down. 2 inches. 2-inch diameter speaker. So I'll build some kind of enclosure on the back for it. But for now, let me just pull off the speaker terminals into on the back of this board here, so we can solder that in. I'm going to solder in some wires that will go out for 12 volts. Plus for micro SD card, because what ends up happening is you put a little micro SD card in here and you then label the MP3s 001.mp3, 002.mp3, and so on. This can do up to 8 different sound inputs. I think you can chain things together, maybe, I'm not entirely sure, but for my purposes, basically these 8 inputs are going to then correspond to 8 different MP3 files. Okay. Now, different ways that you can do this. What Gary was doing was using reed switches on his layout. So he had a reed switch down along the side of the track, and then I think on the underside of his locomotive he had a little magnet. And so as the locomotive would go around past the reed switch on a certain part of the track, then the different reed switches would activate different inputs, and so it would play different MP3 files. Really cool idea. And so as trains come in or out of a station, then it can play certain different announcements. Especially on my Japanese layout, because it's so small, I don't know how well that would work. And there's a whole bunch of different lines that I can do and different trends that I can do. And so I'm going to manually trigger these by using momentary push button switches. All right, so I'm just going to wire these in momentary push button switches. And so as I would push one of those buttons, it will then trigger one of these inputs, a kid falling off a hoverboard upstairs. It'll trigger one of these inputs, and that will then play on the corresponding MP3 files. Now here on Great Northern Cascade Division, not entirely sure if I would still do push buttons or if I would do reed switches. I think the difference is that because again, I could have a whole slew of different passenger trains. I don't know if I necessarily wanted to be triggered by a reed switch, because if I brought in, let's say, the North Coast Limited from Northern Pacific into King Street Station in Seattle, it would be a little bit weird if a passenger announcement gets triggered by a reed switch saying, the Empire Builder service now approaching King Street Station. So I might still do manually triggered inputs, and again, I think that's okay. And honestly, it adds, for me, a little bit of operational interest. So the same way that all of my turnouts are manually controlled around the stations, the operator has to do something. I think you could also say, well, yeah, I'm the operator, I'm throwing the turnouts, I'm controlling the actual locomotive, and I also then want to be controlling the station announcements. So what I'm going to do is get all this stuff wired up. So I'm going to run the wires for the speaker, for power, get these push buttons wired in as well, and then we'll come back and have a look and see what it looks like with lots of pretty wires going everywhere. So at the back here, this is for the 12-volt DC accessory, and what I've done for now, at least, is just coil it up, because I'm going to use a little micro USB when I'm up at the computer to power it, but eventually this is what we'll then use. 8 push-button switches, and only the positive connects in, and it shares a common ground, so at least for now, just kind of pigtailed those together to share the common ground, figure out what I'm going to do with these buttons. I think what I'll end up doing is kind of like for the tortoise switch machines and LED status indicators that I did in the previous video for Great Northern Cascade Division around the Seattle stations. I'll probably laser cut and engrave some kind of little panel for the 8 push buttons, so that there'll be something engraved as to what the different announcements will be, so you'll understand which one it is that you're pressing. But for now, just kind of leave them like that. Did wire up this 3-watt 4-ohm speaker as well. Fairly straightforward there. And what you need to do now, like I say, is go up to the computer. We'll have a quick look at how we do the MP3 files and get onto that microSD card. We do have a little pot switch here that can do volume control, and then need to figure out these dip switches as well. So what you can do, apparently when I looked at this quick online, is that you can configure the dip switches such that when you push one of the inputs, it can play that same file in a loop. When you push one of the inputs, it will play that file, and the next file, next file, next file, until it loops all the way back around, then it will stop. You can have it do that sequentially and then just keep looping. You can have it keep playing the same file to correspond to whatever push button you pressed until you push another push button, then it'll start doing that one, whatever. I need to figure out what the dip switch settings will be such that when I push one push button, it plays just that one file one time, then that's it, it stops. And then it waits until another input, and you push another push button, it'll play that corresponding MP3 file one time, and then it will stop. So you need to have a quick look at what those dip switches will be, but let's take all this nonsense upstairs to the computer desk, have a quick look, like I said, how you can put together some of these MP3s, get it onto the micro SD card, and then we'll plug it in the micro USB and see what happens. We should find, just like that, we can push one of these buttons, and some kind of Japanese will then come out of this little speaker over here. All right, so hanging out at the computer now, and in terms of how can you edit the audio itself, I use a free program called Audacity. I have used this for what feels like about 20 years now. It's a free download, audacityteam.org, and I will go for just the download without the Muse Hub. I don't even know what the Muse Hub is. All you want is just this free editor, really quick download. It's only about 15 meg. And it should come down pretty quick. And when it does, it looks something like this. And I've loaded up an MP3 here already. So in terms of where do you get MP3s from, well, I'm not going to lead you down a dark path on the internet, but I do have a whole bunch of MP3s here that's based on a CD that came out in around about 2007. And I think it was for the Yamanelde line out in Tokyo. So depending on what you're doing, what railroad you're doing, if you want to do station announcements, if you just want to have some kind of sound effects going on, animal sounds playing or rustling leaves, trees, whatever that may be around the layout, you could control this using the MP3 board, but some way you need to get the sound effects to start out with. And so what I am wanting to do is cut this in half, because basically, like a lot of train announcements, it loops it through twice. And for my purposes, I actually only want it once. I want about 20 seconds of audio, and then I want it to cut. So let's have a quick listen as to what this is like. And again, it's going to be in Japanese, and I'm not running this through Google Translate. I am going to try and figure out what it says for you. So let's have a quick listen.
まもなく2番線に上野池袋方面行きが参ります。危ないですから、黄色い線までお下がりください。秋葉原、ご乗車ありがとうございます。2番線ドアが閉まります。ご注意ください。
And so that's where I want them to stop. So right around here, we got about halfway through, and then it stopped. I want it to stop anyway, then it just loops through, does the same thing. Yampe-san, I apologize if you listened to this and I completely got that wrong, but loosely that's what it was saying. This is a station announcement for Akihabara, which is one of the places just north of downtown Tokyo. There's a whole bunch of model train stores there. It's a real nerdy electronic place, electronic stores, anime, all kinds of fun stuff there. So basically it's like, hey, this is the line that you're on. Stand back, that the train's coming into the platform. I think it said platform 2. Yes, I'm pretty sure it said platform 2. The train approaching platform 2. So please stand back behind the yellow line. Akihabara. Doors opening, doors closing. I can't remember what the last part was. Please take care. So a standard station announcement that you would have. So what I'm going to do is just with my mouse, select the rest of this, because I don't really care, come up to edit, and then delete. And so now when we scroll through, all we have is like this, 23 seconds of that main station announcement. So I'm going to come up and export the audio to my computer. And I have already created a folder for some trend audio. And we want to make this an MP3 file because that's all this little MP3 board can play. And there is a very exciting naming scheme. I think it's 00001.mp3. I don't know. I think it's 4 zeros and then a 1. We'll find out. It's either 3 or 4 zeros. So we'll go ahead and say, yep, that's where we want to go. Stereo. Quality wise, I mean, we can just leave everything here, to be honest, because it's not going to be super duper high quality coming through this little speaker that's going to be beneath the layout anyway. So we'll just say, yep, sure, go ahead. And so this was in like that list of tracks that I had. So if we come back, we should now have here this 00001 MP3.
まもなく2番線に上野池袋方面行きが参ります。危ないですから、黄色い線まで。
Yeah, I'm going to stop that. So it was planned through correctly, and if we come in there, we're right at 23 seconds. So we have cut that in half. We just have that looping through the one time. I think we have this named correctly. I'm not entirely sure. We'll find out. And so let's have a look. We're going to copy this. So right click on the file, copy. And if you're on Mac OS, if you're on Linux, it's going to be a little bit different. I'm just in Windows. I'm going to come to where I have my MicroSD card. Nothing in there yet, so I'm going to paste it. Should be pretty quick. And so that's now hanging out over there. So if I pull that out of the computer, and let's see what happens. All right, so change of scenery. What I realized was I wasn't actually getting power to the board in quite the same way that I was expecting. The micro USB is, I guess, so that you can connect the whole thing to the computer. And I hadn't realized that the micro SD card was then being made available, and it was showing as a weird kind of audio device, but it wasn't actually powering it to the point where it could play. Which is kind of an interesting thing to note. You can't plug in a micro USB and be able to actually run the board. It's just kind of making it the storage available. So came back down the layout. I ended up hooking into my 12-volt accessory bus here on the main layout, Great Northern Cascade, but it is also a good validation that it will work on 12-volt power. So this is then the first input. If we trace our red wire here, this is coming to the very first input. And so when we push this button,
まもなく2番線に上野池袋方面行きが参ります。危ないですから、黄色い線まで。
I'm kind of done with that, so I'm going to turn the volume down. But it will just keep playing through until it's finished. And the volume on this is ridiculous. So it's almost finished. But the volume on this is ridiculous. Like you can see, I barely have it turned up. By default, it was at about there. So yeah, I barely have this thing turned up. It's probably not even at 20%, 15%. Very, very powerful with that 20-watt built-in amplifier. So again, great proof of concept that it will work off 12-volt power, which is exactly what I was looking for. So this is, in case people are wondering, it's the DY-HV20T. And I'll put a link in the description to the exact Amazon link that I got for this. The reason why I like it is because it did have that span that it could work on voltages. Some of the other ones would only work at 5 volts or 9 volts, and so you'd have to either use a separate battery pack, or you would have to have some kind of buck converter to drop down from 12 to 9 volts or 5 volts, whatever. This one's great, that can take a whole bunch of voltages. So we did have that one file, and it was named 00001.mp3. When I actually went and looked at the instructions just to double check, it does want it as a 5-bit number. And it actually looked like it can do way more than 8. It looked like it could do up to about 255, depending on how you were controlling it. So I'm going to... For this particular instance, I think 8 physical inputs is fine, but I think what it looked like you could do is you could get a lot more advanced. This could be used as a mini MP3 player. You could build your own MP3 player from it. But it looked like if you hook this up to an Arduino or to a Raspberry Pi or something, then you can address it differently. And so depending on the value of the bits that you're sending it, it can address, up to 255 different MP3 files. For what I'm doing here, I don't know if I care enough to do that, but it is interesting in that I am going to have 2 different stations on this Japanese layout. And it would be good to have some kind of like city background sounds as well. So I am curious about doing that, but at least for now, just we've got our 8 push button inputs. And again, if we think coming up to the Great Northern Cascade layout itself, I think 8 is probably enough for the main part of the station announcements. But if you're doing this just for like kind of random background noise, city scenes, then again, if you wanted to, you could hook into something like an Arduino, and it looks like you can address way more than just the 8 inputs that you can by doing the push buttons like this. I had checked the dip switches as well, and at least mine did come out of the box set correctly, of dip switch 1 being off, 2 being on, 3 being off. That puts it into the mode where, one push button will then play one track, and when it's finished, it's done. I think if you set dip switch 3 to on, then it would be press and hold the button, and then when you would release, it would stop. But whilst the button's being held down, it would play. So again, there are different modes that you can do for this, but this works out perfect for the scenario that I want to do. This speaker, way more powerful than it needs to be. The 20-watt amplifier, way more powerful than it needs to be. So I think what I'm going to go and do is put together another 7 audio tracks of various different stations. Again, for my Japanese layout, it's really not prototypical to anything. It's just kind of made up. So I pulled things like Akihabara. I'll probably do Shinjuku, Shibuya, Shinagawa, Nishan Nippori. Probably butchered the pronunciation of most of those, but just places that I went to so that I can kind of hear them going. I'm also going to 3D print a little enclosure, I think, for the back of the speaker, just so that I can have a little bit more of a baffle to it when it's going to be underneath the layout.
まもなく2番線に上の東京方面行きが参ります。危ないですから黄色い線までお下がりください。西日暮里、西日暮里、ご乗車ありがとうございます。2番線ドアが閉まります。ご注意ください。
Alright, so this is now with it all ready to go on the Japanese layout. I did put in a new power wires for this, just so that they were going to be the right length for what I wanted to do. Also speakers as well. Figured out how far away is the speaker going to be, and so wired in new speaker wires for that. Did also 3D print this little speaker enclosure, just so that it's going to have that sound content act as some baffling, and so you can see the speaker wires just running through a little hole on the side rather. I think for now I'm just going to leave this wired up, although what I did do is solder together, just putting the cap on the end there just to keep it a little bit neater and tidy. And so if we back up a little bit, I think what I'm going to end up doing is the soundboard itself will get mounted over here on the side. That's where the little panel is going to be, I think, to do the audio. Mostly it's going to be controlling just this one station, but we'll see. I guess it could do both stations plus the little kind of suburban station at the back there. And then the speaker itself, we kind of come down, whole massive wiring going on under here, so the subway line's kind of out of commission. But what I think we'll end up doing is we've got one of the accessory bus distribution bars that's hanging out there. That's the 12-volt bus. I've got a 5-volt bus too. The speaker's going to go somewhere around in the middle here, so that you'll get the sound somewhat in the center of the layout, so that again, in theory, it could be for the Shinkansen station, it could be for the subway station when we get to it, it could be for the interurban station at the back. But then the power wires, that's why we need the long wires to come over into the distribution block over here. And then for the speaker wires, if the board's going to be over here, let's get long speaker wires to bring them in the middle. So I am going to get it in place, wire up to the accessory bus, get the speaker in place, make sure that it works, and then the final thing is going to be just to laser cut and then grab a little bit of panel to hold those push buttons. Alright then, so at least for now, I think I'm going to somewhat call this good. This is just kind of roughly in place until there's a fascia that goes all the way along the front of here, aside from the cutout where the subway section is going to be. But I have that MP3 soundboard roughly screwed into the actual framework itself, and then this button board, like I say, is just kind of hanging out there. But
まもなく2番線に上野池袋方面行きが参ります。危ないですから黄色い線までお下がりください。秋葉原ご乗車ありがとうございます。2番線ドアが閉まります。ご注意ください。
That speaker enclosure is then hanging out. It's not right in the middle of the layout. It's kind of left to right it is, but it's not pushed all the way back. I think that's probably a good place, and I don't have the multi-connects for the accessory buses or wired, screwed in or anything. It's all wired in, but it's just a mess while I'm figuring out lighting. There's more to come there. But at least this little section is kind of cleaned up now. Do have the button board ready, and for those that are wondering, hopefully this says station sounds, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in Japanese. So, as you would then be just kind of hanging out up on top, looking at the station. If we try and start off one of those, we'll kind of see what it is like volume-wise, where we would be from running trains. So if I reach over and get one going.
まもなく2番線に上野東京方面行きが参ります。危ないですから黄色い線までお下がりください。西日暮里ご乗車ありがとうございます。2番線ドアが閉まります。ご注意ください。
So I think that works out pretty well. And again, this is testing this stuff out on the Japanese layout. So the Great Northern Cascade layout, the rest of this nonsense behind you, that is going to be a little bit different in terms of it just has a 5 amp separate 12 volt DC accessory bus already running out. But for those that are curious over here, and again, I'm kind of in the middle of wiring all this up now that I've kind of figured out the best way to go. I'm running off one of the standard Kato power packs, and then I'm using one of the DC accessory adapters on the side. So this is my one that runs a 12 volt bus. So it just comes straight out the back, and that's what runs off to the distribution block. I think that goes to 12 different outputs. This one is labeled as a 5 volt accessory bus. It is actually still that exact same 12 volt accessory bus, but if I have a little look underneath here, what I'm doing is running it through a buck converter, which drops it down from 12 volts to 5 volts. Reason being is that the lighting stuff that I'm playing around with runs off an Arduino Nano, and Arduino Nanos typically I'll run at 5 volts. So that's combined how I'm doing my two accessory buses. So for the most part, if we think just about that 12 volt accessory bus, you can do it all with the straight Kato equipment. The accessory adapter comes out the back, off to the distribution block. That distribution block then powers that MP3 soundboard at 12 volts. So depending on what you would have running on your layout, I think that the MP3 soundboard can go from 7 volts up to about 35 volts. So it's pretty wide range of what it can do in terms of power. But if you needed to, depending on what MP3 soundboard you get, if you got one that will run off 3.35 volts, something like that, you could still use that exact same Kato accessory bus, also accessory adapter, and then run it through something like a buck converter to drop it down. Or you just find a separate little wall wart power supply that runs at the voltage that you want, and you just power it completely separately. But this is how I am trying to do it with a 12 volt bus and then a 5 volt bus, because I'm going to have a few more Arduinos. But in general, happy with how this MP3 soundboard has worked out. I think it's a real good little addition to this Japanese layout, especially since you're just kind of right here. And so depending on what trends will be running, really easy to make announcements. Really cool little device, this MP3 soundboard. And I think even with those pre-wired push buttons to kind of cheat, make it easier, and the speaker, in total, it was probably $20, $25, if that. And I think it makes a really, really good addition to the layout.
まもなく2番線に東京品川方面行きが参ります。危ないですから黄色い線までお下がりください。神田、ご乗車ありがとうございます。2番線ドアが閉まります。ご注意ください。